Hello everyone, welcome back to the next lesson. And for this lesson, we are going to be looking at the side effect of art being extremely valuable, whether it is monetary value or intrinsic value. And for this one, we're going to focus on the side effect of the monetary value of art, which is art theft, answering the question, why is art a major target for thieves? Now, what is art theft exactly, and why should we care about it? So, art theft is a cultural and property crime. So, this is extremely important because this fits in with a lot of different types of crime. So, this fits with theft, fraud, looting, and trafficking. So, these all fit together. So, art theft, fraud, looting, trafficking, these are dealing with when art is stolen, replaced, trafficked to one location to another. So, this could refer to from one state to another or one country to another. So this is a very large part of art. And so this is a very traumatic type of crime to deal with. So what you might not know is after drugs and guns, art theft is the biggest criminal enterprise in the world, costing billions of dollars a year. And typically, art theft is used to motivate other types of crimes. So, art is a form of currency. So, the reason that thieves steal art rather than money. Money is easy to trace. Art is not as easy to trace. It's difficult to find a buyer for a work of art, but if someone is willing to purchase it, willing to own a stolen work of art, then they're willing to pay high dollar for these particular works to have for themselves. So art objects are typically very small, they're lightweight, and they're worth millions of dollars. In the same way, in order to rob a bank to get the same kind of money, it would have to be the Federal Reserve Bank, basically, in order to get that same kind of money. And so it is faster to make millions of dollars very quickly with stealing art than it is for most other types of crimes. So less than 10% of stolen art is recovered, and that is a very depressing number. So many of the ones we are going to be looking at, many of the paintings and the works of art that have been stolen, many of them have been recovered. And so working at more theft, which is quite a lot of it, it gets depressing after a while. So we'll be looking at a variety here. So we're going to be looking at particular different kinds of theft before getting into some of the nitty-gritty ones. So, one type of art theft is what's called a state theft. And so, a state theft is when a nation or people in charge of a nation or a group or kind of like any kind of government is in charge of basically removing art from one locale to another. So, basically if you live in a neighborhood with a homeowners association and the person in charge of the homeowners association basically decides to, oh, I'm going to take your lawn ornament here, and if that lawn ornament is your favorite one, then that could be representative of a state theft, for instance, because your ruling group of the homeowner president is taking something that doesn't belong to them. Is that a exaggeration of a problem? Yes, but it is a good one. So, the most notorious state thefts that have been committed in recent history would be the looting of art by Nazi Germany. Now, what most people don't know is that art theft was rampant during World War II. Lots of art was moved and smuggled across lines during the war. Hitler was a big fan of the art world. I guess we can use that term. And so he loved collecting art, and so many of his Nazi generals and high commanders also liked to collect art. And so there was a lot of things being moved around, including this one. This is Raphael, Portrait of a Young Man. This was stolen from a museum in Poland, the Krakow Gallery, I believe. This was stolen in 1939, and it is still missing. So a lot of the art that was stolen during World War II is still missing, and a lot of it has been recovered over time. A lot of it was taken from Jewish families and Jewish gallery owners, and so that is a big issue with work being given back to the Jewish families and trying to be sent back to survivors or relatives of families who were killed. And so that is a very key part of trying to solve this particular problem. Now, the next type of one we're going to look at is similar to state theft, but is different based on who does it. And so this is called wartime looting. And so what wartime looting is when a person or persons takes advantage of basically wartime turmoil. And so this could be someone who is living in a war torn country or someone who is looking into a war torn country and is like, they are in chaos right now, so I can take whatever I want from that particular country. And so, recent ones, for instance, have been the looting of the Iraq museums during the Iraq War, and that was what this one occurred to. So, this is the head of Akkadian ruler. This is from the Akkadian Empire. There's not much art from this time period left, and so any of it is extremely valuable. The Akkadian Empire was a empire that was native to Iraq in that area long time ago. And so this represents part of their history. And this was stolen in 2003, and it was recovered a few months later. So it was good that it was recovered, but this is an example of wartime looting. So the museum was basically ransacked and during this part of the war, and so a lot of these artifacts were taken. But it is assumed that the people who took them didn't really know what to do with them. They knew they were valuable, but they wouldn't know how to sell them, and so they were recovered and returned to the museum, to the museum's property. And so this is typically what happens with wartime looting is if you get people who don't know what to do with the artifact, they will either dispose of it or they will try to sell it for whatever they can. Now, the next one we're going to look at is probably a tricky one. So this is theft in technicality, but really what it's called is museum misappropriation. And so, museum misappropriation is when a museum retains the ownership of a work of art despite there being kind of a history. And so, this typically relates to works of art that have been stolen and then eventually wind up at a museum, and the ownership is in question because the paperwork is murky, or the original owner does not have proof that the work of art belongs to them. And so, this is part of the issue with the works of art that were stolen during World War II, as a lot of records were destroyed. And so, some works have cropped up in museums and have been returned to their original owners, while some of the museums are retaining the works because the families of the original owners are all dead and they can't find any relatives or they can't provide proof of ownership. And so that's where we get a little tricky. Now, this one was a little more complicated. This one is the portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer, the first portrait by Gustav Klimt. Klimt was a famous Jewish artist, Austrian Jewish artist in the early 20th century. This painting has an interesting history. There's actually a movie about this painting, Woman in Gold, with Ryan Reynolds. It's a very good movie. And so this particular work was painted for Adele Bloch-Bauer. The Bloch-Bauer family was a prominent Jewish family living in Vienna, Austria in the early 20th century. Now, Adele was a prominent patron of the arts, and she died in the 1920s time period, I think 23, 24, something in there. And she put in her will that she wished for the paintings, the Klimt paintings that she had, to be donated to the Austrian gallery. So there was a lot of kind of back and forth on that one, but basically the paintings belonged to her husband. Her husband paid for them, and so he acknowledged that this part of the will was more of a request from his wife that he donates the paintings, and so he was going to carry out that wish. Problem was when Austria was annexed by Nazi Germany, a lot of the possessions from Jewish families were seized as a way to get them out of Jewish control. And so the Bloch-Bauer family, so the husband and his nieces and nephews, had to flee Austria to basically save their lives and left many of their belongings behind, including the paintings and all of their artwork collection. And so the paintings were put into the Austrian hold. So basically, Austrian government basically said they owned them, and so they wound up in the Austrian gallery. So in the 2000s, I think it was 2003, the niece of Adele Bloch-Bauer, Maria Altman, she sued the government for return of her property based off of the restoration of victims of World War II, but restoration of their stuff, because the husband, the Blackbriar husband, he willed his entire estate to his heirs, and his estate still contained the materials that were stolen from him. So there was a lot of back and forth as to who actually owned these paintings, because Adele Bloch-Bauer wanted them to go to the gallery. The gallery ended up with them through nefarious means. The husband wanted them to go to his heirs. So there's a lot of back and forth. So basically, what happened is that an arbitration was reached where 5 out of the 6 Klimt paintings owned by the Blackbriar family were returned to the Altman Bloch-Bauer family survivors' descendants, and they were put up for auction, and they were purchased by the Nouveau Gallery in New York. And so they were recovered basically in 2006. So this occurred in 2006. So it's still fairly recent. So this tells you that this particular type of art crime is still happening. There are still museums that are holding on to works of art that have a history of being stolen, and it is a stain for the museum, but it is very difficult for some cases to find the correct ownership, and so museums are justifying it that way. So this is it's not a common problem, but it is a problem that does show up quite frequently. Now, one that is new. So the digital theft of art is new, and it has a lot of different facets. So we're going to look at a couple of them. So digital art theft refers to when a work of art that is distributed through the online platform is appropriated by someone else and used for different things. So there's a lot of different keys here. So if you share pictures of art or just pictures on the internet, you kind of have to understand that people could use it for other things. And so that gets pretty tricky, particularly for artists. And so this is one example, Aja Trier. Early in 2020, she found out that the art she created, which is based off of a lot of Starry Night stuff, Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh. A lot of the paintings and art she created was being sold through a blog and on OpenSea, and so she was horrified, confused that her work was being sold and it was being created to make NFTs. And so basically, millions of dollars were being kind of sold right from under her nose. And so it took her a couple months to get all of that taken down and get the rights to her works of art back from the internet. In the meantime, she was out several millions of dollars because people were using her stuff to create other things. And so this is a type of digital art theft. Other types of digital art theft would be kind of sharing a work of art through social media without properly crediting the artist. And so this is another common problem. Or possibly even having your photos taken from a social media platform such as Facebook or Instagram. Some people have their photos taken and utilized for advertisements or for other works of art, and so that is also a common problem. And so this is a new type of theft that people are still dealing with it, because the general idea is, although the photo belongs to you, if you post it and post it on the web, post it out into the internet, you have kind of released it into the world for people to use, and so you have to deal with the consequences. So there is some key problems with this particular type of thing. So there's always an issue. So now we're going to look at what's called individual thefts. And so these are the ones that people tend to think of when they think of art theft. So first individual theft we're going to look at the theft of the Mona Lisa. So a lot of people tend to ask me, why is the Mona Lisa the most famous painting in the world? There are multiple different reasons. One of them is painting of Leonardo da Vinci. It was probably one of his favorite paintings. He kind of carried it around with him. But one of the reasons is because it was stolen in 1911. And so this painting was stolen from the Louvre Museum, where it still is, and it was stolen by Vincenzo Peruggia, who was an Italian immigrant living in Paris at the time. And so after he stole the painting, and people realized it was missing. It was a couple days later, and this painting showed up in the newspaper, like on front page news, for weeks and then months and then years. People were still speculating of who stole the Mona Lisa, and a lot of famous names were attached to it, such as American millionaires or the mafia or mob bosses. So different people were attached to this theft, and so people were kind of looking for, where is the Mona Lisa? And so when the painting was eventually recovered in 1913, it was in Florence at the time. Vincenzo Peruggia had smuggled it out of France and into Florence in an attempt to sell it to the Uffizi Gallery. He was claiming he was doing it by returning Italian work of art to Italy rather than being in France. So there was a lot going on with this particular theft. But the painting was recovered, and after a quick tour around Italy, it was returned to France. And so this one basically became a very famous painting because it was in the news very frequently and a lot of people wanted to see it returned. So, although it is famous for being a Da Vinci portrait, it became famous for this kind of publicity, and so it just grew through the 20th century. Now, the next kind of most infamous art theft happened in 1990. So, March 18th, 1990, this is called the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist. And if you watch any kind of crime shows on TV or Netflix set in the US, they will typically have some kind of discussion episode about this particular theft because there's a lot of mystery kind of surrounding it. And so it is a very complicated heist, and it actually is one of the most basically one of the wealthiest heists in recent history. So, two men broke into the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, and this is a private museum, so it's a kind of like a house museum. And so these thieves knocked out the security guard, and they basically had a little over an hour through the museum to kind of wander around and pick up a few works of art that they wanted. And so the total amount of money that was stolen from this one, the worth of all these works of art was well over $100 million. So probably closer to 150 million, which was what is appraised. So it might be closer to 200 million now. So it is a very valuable heist, and one of the paintings that was the Rembrandt Storm on the Sea of Galilee, and so this painting was one of the ones that was stolen, and this one hasn't been solved. So there are several works of art that are still missing, including paintings and sketches by Edgar Degas, Edouard Monet, Gover Flint, and so these were all valuable works of art, including one by Vermeer. And so the museum really wants these works of art to be returned because these were key parts of their collection. But there's a lot about this particular heist that's very mysterious, so much that it sparked a Netflix documentary about it, and that there are a lot of people still trying to solve it and piece the clues together. So much so that the museum is offering currently a $10 million reward for information leading to the work's recovery. So that is a very profitable help for that one. Now, the next one we're going to look at, this one is the theft from the Van Gogh Museum. And so this particular heist occurred in 2002. The works have been recovered at this point. So this particular one, two paintings were stolen from the Vincent van Gogh Museum. They are this one, which is a congregation leaving the Reformed Church in Neuen, and the other one being the view of the sea at Chevron, I believe. And so these particular works were stolen, and I do believe that the perpetrators were caught, but the works were not recovered when they were caught. And so they eventually found them in 2016. And so the paintings were authenticated, cleaned, touched up, and they were returned to the museum in late of 2016. And so the fact that they were found was a very good sign for this particular museum. The next stuff we'll look at is the Monk Museum theft. And so this one is also another weird one. So in 2004, masked gunmen kind of entered the Monk Museum, which the Monk Museum is a museum celebrating Edvard Munch. And so two paintings were stolen. And the Scream, which is Edvard Munch's most famous painting, one of the versions was stolen from the Monk Museum. And then the second painting was stolen was this painting here, which was the Madonna. And so the thieves were caught and they were convicted, but the works of art were not recovered until 2006. And so this kind of shows how a lot of art crime doesn't really get solved. So even if they catch the people who have stolen the work of art, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to find the work. So oftentimes they have already disposed of the work or they've already gotten rid of it in some way, and so it takes time to actually track down and find them. Sometime longer than others. 2 years was a pretty good turnaround for these ones. The last one we're going to look at is the Kunsthal Museum heist, and this one is probably the most frustrating for me. Not as frustrating as Isabel Stewart Gardner, but this one is extremely frustrating. So in 2012, 7 paintings were stolen from the Kunsthal Museum. And so, including this painting, was the Monet Charing Cross Bridge, London. And so, this particular crime was very frustrating because they caught the thieves, and the thieves were apparently on a Tinder date, and so this is kind of how the theft occurred, is off of a Tinder date, and so they caught them, and so then after the one perpetrator was captured, his mother took the paintings and burned them, as reported. And so she later recanted this particular story, saying that, oh, she burned them, but then later she said she didn't. And so this became a bit of an issue because if she had destroyed the paintings, they could be just put on the destroyed painting list. But since she recanted, they have to be left on the stolen art list. But the police did find pigments and canvas and pieces of wood for the framing in her fireplace dating to the correct time period for the paintings. And so they do believe these works of art were destroyed after the theft as a way to kind of clear up the issue. Basically, no body, no crime is kind of how this particular idea was solved for this one. So individual thefts are more fun to talk about than the state theft or wartime looting or things like that, because they're committed by individuals and they have individual motives, and sometimes they're the simple smash and grab opportunity, other times they're well thought out and planned, and so that makes them a little more interesting, a little more mysterious, particularly with the way Hollywood describes them. But you still have to understand that these paintings are rarely recovered. These works of art are rarely recovered. And so then the museums and galleries that are left to kind of pick up the pieces have to deal with their loss. So this is the end of art theft. I hope you have learned something interesting, and I will see you in the next lesson.